You are watching the 61st edition of Worldview from Islamabad, coming to you from the headquarters of PTV Network, right here in the Pakistani capital. With the close cooperation between Islamabad and Washington these days, it's not unusual to see American officials visiting Islamabad regularly, and vice versa, of course, Pakistani officials in Washington, D.C. Nothing unusual about that. But it's rare to see an American official with a Pakistani heritage or background visiting the Pakistani capital. And what's even rarer is to have an American official with a Pakistani heritage who's also a woman visiting Islamabad. Today we have in the Pakistani capital, Islamabad, somebody who combines both things. I'm glad to introduce here in the studio Ambassador Shirin Tahir-Kheli. Thank you, Ambassador, for being here.
Thank you for having me here.
You've had a very hectic few days here in the Pakistani capital, and you're of course the senior advisor to U.S. Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice on women's empowerment. I have many questions to ask you, and while we discuss several points that I would like to raise with you, my viewers will get to read in bullet form some of the highlights of your career. Now, we have little time. I'll condense as many questions as I can, and I'll begin with this one. Why would a U.S. Secretary of State, basically a foreign minister, have a position for a women's advisor, women's empowerment advisor? I mean, it would seem for people in this part of the world that this is something that would be more the domain of a social affairs minister or something to that effect. Why would a foreign minister be concerned with this portfolio?
I think it's a very good question, and it's a very natural question. I do get asked this often in my travels abroad. And if you sort of think about it in terms of what the work of this administration has been, this president and this Secretary of State have been extremely supportive of issues related to women's empowerment for the past 6 years. And the Secretary not only sort of embodies it and is of course hugely recognized for all the wonderful credentials that she has, but she's somebody who believes that the time has now come where women's empowerment is no longer a soft issue. She cares about it. She did when she was at the National Security Council as the National Security Advisor. She's been an advisor to a president who spent an enormous amount of energy on it.
So women's empowerment is part of the U.S. foreign policy?
Yes.
The second question, the logical question is, are you not concerned when you make this part of the U.S. foreign policy that you might come sort of very too strongly on to other nations that might feel that this is sort of a cultural thing for them, and that this is something that they need to decide within their own parameters, within their own social situations? It's sort of, first of all, it's not that it's become a part of U.S. foreign policy. It's been evolving over time. It's been a priority for the last 6 years. So it's a natural that we continue. But, the question sort of implies that there's a U.S. model that then goes and is fit all over the place. That's not the case. You're not implying that?
No. In fact, it's one of the real cases. I mean, since I was privileged to be part of this discussion that the leaders had in September, it's amazing. The Foreign Minister of Barbados sharing experience Barbados has had and where it might need to go. President of Liberia has called a meeting in January 2008 to focus on women's political empowerment, both in terms of training women, but also in terms of, what do you do once you become a leader? So it's a real partnership. Everybody does it according to their priorities, but I've never heard any woman or any leader say, actually women like to be denied participation. Women like to be excluded from economic opportunity. Women like to be beaten up. Women like to be violated. So, it's the need for it is there. Each country will recognize their own priorities. They will implement it according to their own action plan. But what's exciting, I think, at this time in history is that so many countries have made this a priority. I've attended at the UN General Assembly, you probably know that the President of the General Assembly this year, the 61st Assembly, is a Muslim woman, first time a Muslim woman. She's a lawyer, human rights lawyer from Bahrain. So President Hayal Khalifa convened a 2-day session of the General Assembly on women's empowerment. And she said, she had set aside the morning for statements and the afternoons for interactive session. What happened is 82 countries signed up to speak. And one can say, well, in speeches everybody speaks, but I was able to attend part of that session, and I had some 20-some countries. And country after country came up and basically gave a report card on itself. It was amazing because, you have a vision of some of the larger women's meetings which have got into the polemics of who does what. This was a report by the given country on what they've done, what they hope to do, and what are the impediments. I think it's unprecedented.
Now you're wrapping up a visit to Pakistan, of course, so you spent almost 4 to 5 days here.
Yes.
I'll come to that in a minute, but first I'd like to also focus on you. I mean, I'm sure this is not a call-in show, but if it were, I'm sure I'd receive many calls here asking about your experience in Washington, D.C., an American Muslim woman and an American citizen of Pakistani heritage. Your experience there, I mean, how did you reach the position where you are today? I understand you have had a long career in Washington, D.C.
Yes, for an academic, it's been a long career in government. So, but I first of all want to apologize. You can see I've been talking a lot in Pakistan. I'm in the process of losing my voice. But it's a good question, and I feel actually, I mean, in many ways, I've been very fortunate. I'm extremely proud of my heritage. I had extraordinary opportunities because I'm the daughter of Dr. Aziuddin Siddiqui, who established 3 of Pakistan's 5 universities.
I understand he was the founder of the Quaid-e-Azam
as well as
University
Peshawar, as well as Sindh. The library at Quaid-e-Azam University is named actually after him.
Yeah.
So so the concept of public service is all I grew up in, and I've either taught or I've been in government. And I think America is an extraordinary country, and it actually, much more than whether or not, I had special promise, I think it speaks well of America.
True. This is what I need to ask you here. I mean, how the official Washington gave a chance to an American Muslim woman to realize her full potential. And of course, the reason I'm asking you this is because and I know that, because of the political history and the political events taking place these days, we have a lot of people in this part of the world who have a negative image of the United States, and I'm sure there are a lot of people in the U.S. who do not fully understand us. So there's this gap, of communication. Explain to my viewers this story briefly. Of course, we don't have much time, but you were given a chance by America, an American Muslim woman.
It's and as you said, there are stereotypes, there are misunderstandings, there are misgivings, and I think for those of us in positions of responsibility, it's important to try and bridge these misunderstandings. So I'm indeed really happy to be here to talk about, ways in which I've played a small part. But if the kinds of efforts at different levels, from the President to Secretary Rice, Karen Hughes is undertaking to try and see how we might actually reach across. When I come to Pakistan, it seems unnatural for people to ask me this because they've heard all of the other stories. The American system really allows, in ways that it's hard to explain, but my story is really the story of America. When you look at people who go to America, first of all, they go there because they're either interested in something that they want to do, they believe in, etc. And then when you work hard, you have a chance to excel. And the system provides ways in which you can be an academic, but you can also go into government from time to time. If I became a teacher and a professional in a university person at a time when there weren't that many women in strategic studies, I remember being in...
You mean American Muslim women, or
anyway,
just generally?
Women
Yeah.
in general. When I was at the Army War College as a faculty member, this is the U.S. Army War College, I don't know that there were too many, if any. My first stint at the National Security Council, there were only one or two.
I'm surprised, and there was no stereotyping, an American Muslim woman. I mean,
no, I did not find that. I think, look, if you look like me, and I'm happy to look like me. So, but the good thing is, and then you work for the President of the United States, and you have a chance to go into the Oval Office, you get noticed because, you know, I mean, you're just not the usual person in a job like that. And then if you open your mouth, and you're obviously there because you're supposed to know something, and if you do, and you get a chance to make your point, you get the opportunity because, I mean, you can't just sort of say, look, I'm a Muslim woman and therefore I need to be given X, Y, and Z. You have to, you have a profession. I happen to feel passionately about my profession. I think that's important. And in, you know, it's a journey that seemed natural. I became a citizen in 1970. I became an American ambassador in 1990. I know no other country other than America where this would happen.
Sure.
And it doesn't mean that everybody's, you know, every day is sort of the ups and downs. I mean, I tend to be a person who looks at the glass as being half full. There are others who, and you've got to have a sense of humor because
and of course
when you're breaking ground, you have the responsibility that you also feel that, my goodness, if I fail, people are going to think all people from this part of the world are no good. So it does, I mean, it does build the pressure, but then it also sort of makes you feel good. When I got sworn in to go to New York, by then Secretary of State, and somebody said to me, you know, we're looking for a Quran, and I said, it's okay, people of the book, you know, it's okay. And they said, but you know, you are our first Muslim ambassador in American history. That I had not known. And it came as a jolt, and I thought, oh my goodness, if I fail, now I'm taking the whole Ummah down with me. So,
nice
so there are moments when you sort of panic, but I think you're judged on who you are, what you do.
One more question, Ambassador. In our part of the world, of course, if you go outside the circle of people in government, people in the academia, the journalist community, if you go beyond these circles, to ordinary people in the streets, there are many people who think, who believe, who have read, who have been taught or indoctrinated that somehow official Washington, the American political establishment, is inherently anti-Muslim or anti-Islam or against Muslim countries. And of course, those who criticize the United States have played this card very well over the past 5 years, especially after 9/11, and they basically said, you know, America is, because of the war in Iraq and what happened, and Afghanistan, of course, as well, said, you know, America is inherently anti-Islam. Your sense?
Obviously, I disagree strongly, and it's, you know, there've been some tough moments, such as 9/11, which came upon the United States out of the blue. But despite the horror of that day and the sort of the strike of terrorism deep inside, you know, not just the country but the psyche, the President of the United States immediately said, this is not a war between the United States and Islam. This happens to be a group of people who have misused their religion in order to cause harm and wreak terror on America and the world. This is a joint fight. So I think ever since that moment where it would have been so easy to have bent to a different tone, the President has said this again and again. Secretary Rice has said it again and again. Other senior-most officials in the United States have said it. They've said it. They've reached out. We've tried to do what we can in terms of deepening understanding, exchanges between Muslim countries and the United States, encouraging travel despite the difficulties that I know that we're still trying to work to make sure it occurs. And if you think about various times when America has stepped in to help Muslim countries, including in times of crisis, be it the earthquake, be it the tsunami, You know, there are that
Bosnia,
huge
Kuwait,
yeah, and America is a country that hasn't collected an empire. You know, went into Kuwait, liberated that country. Kuwaitis went back to Kuwait. Americans went home. So you know, this is an extraordinary history of a country that has been a friend to a lot of Muslim countries and considers itself to be a friend of Muslim countries, is respectful. Where else abroad do Muslims get to practice their faith with the freedom they do in the United States?
I talked to some Americans who've had, of course, very close interaction with the American society, and I just reached this conclusion, although it might sound a little controversial, but it just seems on the good side,
Yes.
the Muslims, in fact, have a lot of common with the values that most Americans believe in.
And it's,
Did you agree with that?
Yes, and you know, the president has said again and again, these are our citizens. They're Americans. I mean, and they believe in family and faith and you know, civic duty and all of those things. They're hardworking. They pay taxes. They do all of the things Americans are supposed to do.
And now we have an American citizen, an American president who is a strong believer in God, and that's something we share in this part of the world. It's a high point.
I think you know, Americans have believed in God, so that's not for me such a big thing. But I do think that what you've said in terms of finding the commonalities, if you look at the experience of Muslims in America and Muslims in other parts of the world, you know, the integration of Muslims within American communities
has been stronger.
Has been very strong, and how they reached out to each other in the aftermath of 9/11, and compared with what happened in France last summer.
That's true.
It's extraordinary, and it speaks. And I think we make contributions as Americans, and that's how we are judged, and that's how it should be.
That's a good thing.
Everywhere.
Now, Ambassador, in Pakistan, 4 days you spent here. I understand since taking up this position, this is your first visit to Pakistan, and you're going to go to other countries as well. What exactly were you looking for when you came here? I mean, we are also, our government is doing a lot.
Indeed.
Yeah, so...
You know, I mean, I grew up in Peshawar, so I am conscious of the things that were happening even, you know, in the 50s, 60s in Pakistan, and the things that women were doing. This is a very vibrant society, and women have done very well in various ways. But it's also, I mean, I came back to, on this visit, to sort of make myself familiar with this portfolio and what it, you know, meeting with civil society leaders, people who look at all of those 4 strands.
And we have a strong civil society here.
Right, and you know, as I mentioned, you know, looking at issues that deal with women's empowerment across the board. And to sort of mostly listen and learn, and this is what I'll be doing in other countries. This is, as I said, a partnership. So we need to hear each other, we need to find out why we care. And it's been an absolute give and take. I've learned a lot. I've been asked a lot of questions, which is why my voice is dipping. But it's been a very, very important sort of 4 days for me as I do my work for the Secretary of State, who's very happy that I'm here and is particularly encouraging of outreach, because I think it's important for Pakistan to understand that this is an important relationship, that you know, the Secretary has cared and has spent a lot of time on it, and we look at it in all of its facets, including the women of Pakistan.
Of course, it's just not possible to avoid political questions when you have an American official sitting right across from you, but I will overcome this urge and I will not get into anything political. Last question, I mean, you work closely with Secretary Rice. Is she really as tough as she appears? Because she looks very tough,
well, you know,
very stern.
Secretary Rice is not only one of the brightest people that it's been my fortune to work with, and I've been fortunate and also very picky, because at the end of the day it's who we work for that makes life worthwhile. She's extraordinary in her ability to reach out. She is one of the sharpest minds I've ever come across, and she's one of the most gracious people that I've ever met from any country. So I consider myself to be extremely fortunate to be working directly for her. And the issues, sometimes are tough issues. It's important to remember that for a country that has the position that the United States has, there are some issues that are difficult issues. And you have to deal with them as part of the large portfolio. But I must say that never have I seen anybody deal with these very tough issues with the touch she has. And so, as you can tell, I'm a great fan of hers.
Well, your trust and your admiration is not misplaced. Ambassador Shirin Tahir-Kheli, thank you very much for taking the time.
Thank you very much.
Here. It's good to listen to your insights. You have to stay put, because next we're going to take a look at some of the high points of Pakistani diplomacy in the past week. Thank you again, Ambassador.
Thank you.
Thank you. Pakistani diplomats, always on alert, had a especially hectic week these past few days. First, in the beginning of the week, we had a visit by a parliamentary delegation representing NATO countries. And then Pakistan and India both launched from Islamabad the fourth round of the peace process, the composite dialogue between the two countries, essentially this process entering its fourth year. Also, we had a visit by Mr. Richard Boucher, who's responsible for Central Asia and South Asia in the U.S. State Department. He was here in Islamabad, met the Pakistani leadership. And very importantly, the Prime Minister of Pakistan, Mr. Shaukat Aziz, opened a conference on the possibilities of resolving the Kashmir dispute between Pakistan and India, a very important event that was also attended by some important figures from Kashmir, both Azad Kashmir and the Indian-occupied Kashmir. And also our Prime Minister went to Uzbekistan and met there the Uzbek leadership. That was also a very important visit, considering the fact that Pakistan attaches a lot of importance to our relationship with the countries of the Central Asian region. So it was a hectic week. We're going to show you a report that will sum up what happened in the past week, and then I'm going to have a brief chat with the spokeswoman of the Pakistan Foreign Office, Ms. Tasneem Aslam, and I'm going to talk to her about the news in some of the media over the past week that the U.S. Senate passed legislation conditioning future U.S. aid to a number of things, and which turns out not to be accurate the way it was presented in the media. So I'm going to talk to her about this. First, let's watch the report. Pakistani diplomats concluded a busy week this weekend, talking to a delegation from NATO, conducting important talks with a senior American official, dealing with crucial economic and strategic issues linked to Central Asia, steering the Pakistani policy on Kashmir, and in the process launching the fourth round of the peace process with India. The visit of the NATO delegation indicated growing two-way exchange between Islamabad and the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, especially as it takes on more responsibilities in Afghanistan. Richard Boucher, the U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for South and Central Asia, was in Islamabad last week, his second visit in 3 months. His meetings with Pakistani leaders were part of the ongoing dialogue between Islamabad and Washington. But during a press conference, he had an interesting answer for reporters concerned about reports on legislation in the U.S. Congress that talks about making aid to Pakistan conditional. A final legislation was still to be adopted by the Congress, he said, and as such, it was premature to talk about it. And, he said, this is not Pressler, and we are working with both the U.S. houses to ensure that there is no aid cut to Pakistan. Pakistan, he said, is a strong U.S. ally against war on terror and would continue to be supported by the Bush administration. During the week, Pakistan's Prime Minister, Mr. Shaukat Aziz, presided over two very important foreign policy initiatives. One was an international conference in Islamabad on the possibilities for the resolution of the Kashmir dispute with India. And the other was his visit to Uzbekistan, where he renewed that nation's historical ties to Pakistan and also talked about robust cooperation in the energy sector. And finally, last week, the peace process between Pakistan and India entered its fourth year with the launching of the fourth round of the composite dialogue between the two nations. But just in case observers lost track of the developments over the last 3 years, a joint statement released in Islamabad promised that 2007 is a critical year for the peace talks between Islamabad and New Delhi and can prove to be a watershed. Okay, that was a report. Now we go to the Pakistan Foreign Office, where I'm joined from there over the phone by Ms. Tasneem Aslam, the spokeswoman of our Foreign Office. Thank you very much, madam, for being with us.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll begin with the visit by the NATO parliamentary delegation. Now, we, of course, know that NATO is trying to expand its presence in Afghanistan. There are a lot of things to discuss. What is it exactly that our NATO friends, the parliamentary delegation, heard from our side during the meetings, during the time they spent here in Islamabad?
Well, you know that Pakistan and NATO have been working for some time together now to expand the relationship, and NATO is very keen in this regard. And these are routine interactions in that context. There wasn't any special significance in that.
Does this mean that this parliamentary delegation did not raise the question of Afghanistan during their meetings here?
Well, that is a situation that concerns everyone, and it is discussed in almost all our interactions.
Okay, let's move on to the Pak-Indian peace process. Now, we launched the fourth round now in the past week. Is the Pakistani side optimistic this time that, you know, we're going to achieve something in the fourth round that was not possible in the past 3 rounds of the composite dialogue?
Well, we have repeatedly said that we have worked on the confidence building measures, and there are a number of confidence building measures that are in place. They are working well, and these have also contributed to the improvement of environment between the two countries. And it is important that we make use of this improved environment and move towards resolution of the disputes. Generally, also, we say that we have tried to manage conflicts for the last 60 years. It hasn't worked, so we should now try to resolve these conflicts so that this region can develop like the rest of the world.
Okay, Ms. Aslam, let me ask you this question. I mean, we just launched the fourth round of the composite dialogue. If we go back to the third round, what is it exactly that has moved forward, or rather, inched forward in this peace process with India? If we compare the third round, the situation that was on the ground at the beginning of the third round, and the situation now in our peace talks with India at the beginning of the fourth round?
Well, there are very serious discussions, as we have said, and as the Indian leadership has also said, that we have had unprecedented and very intense and focused discussions on Kashmir in the last 2-3 years. And these discussions are not in a vacuum.
Okay, the American Assistant Secretary of State, Mr. Richard Boucher, was also in Pakistan, in Islamabad this week. Now, what was his topmost priority in his meetings? The one issue or question that he discussed with Pakistani officials during his meetings here this time?
Well, discussions between Pakistan and U.S. in many dimensions, as the relationship has, and Mr. Richard Boucher's visit was a routine visit as part of our regular contacts. And if you recall, he visited Pakistan in January as well. And the purpose was to review progress in the bilateral relations. And there are a number of initiatives that are underway at the moment in various fields. and we continue to interact, we continue to exchange views on how to carry our relationship forward.
His visit coincided with news about passage of a bill in the U.S. Senate, somehow, conditioning future military aid to Pakistan to a number of things.
I don't know where this thing come from, and why there is this impression that there has been some legislation that restricts or makes assistance to Pakistan conditional. There's absolutely no truth in it. There is nothing of that sort.
So nothing of the sort was raised.
Well, you know that a bill is under consideration in the U.S. Congress. The House adopted a bill which contains language on Pakistan, which we find is discriminatory, and we do not accept that. And we have made our views known to the U.S. administration and to the U.S. Congress as well. We are engaged with them. The Congress has, the administration has assured us that they would be working with the Congress to make sure that language which is detrimental to bilateral relations is removed. The Senate version of that legislation does not contain any language in Pakistan. So what we have at this stage is that the two different versions of this legislation would now be discussed in the conference committee. And effort would be, of the conferees, would be to reconcile the two bills. And we expect the administration to remain engaged with Congress, as we are, to make sure that nothing that is not helpful to bilateral relations is reflected in the final version.
Okay, Ms. Tasneem Aslam, the spokesperson for the Pakistan Foreign Office, joining us over the phone from her office a few blocks away from here, of course, down at the building of the Pakistan Foreign Ministry. Now, before I move on to the conclusion of this edition, I have something to show you. Of course, normally on this show, we try to focus on the Pakistan foreign policy and foreign policy issues that are of interest to people in this part of the world. And very, it's very rare that we get into anything that is domestic. We do that, but only if it has significance with something that's also happening outside Pakistan. But I'm going to break with this tradition in this edition, briefly, that is, not for too long. Last week, of course, we all saw this event taking place in Islamabad, where there was this issue outside the Supreme Court building of Pakistan. A fairly normal thing happens everywhere. A group of lawyers came out. They had a position, a point of view, and they were peacefully out to demonstrate, and that's their right. But later on, things went berserk in a number of ways. Things went out of control, and of course police had to intervene, and it was a messy scene, to say the least. Something that I can assure you the people of the Pakistani capital, which is a serene place normally, are not used to, have not seen these kind of images before. And there's this brief little report that I'd like to show you. It's interesting about that event. It was covered outside Pakistan. A lot of people sitting outside Pakistan made their minds or got their impressions of the city watching that incident, which of course, again, as all incidents which are small in scale, but when they of course are seen through the lens of the camera on television screens, somehow seem to develop a life of their own. So it's a brief report kind of a thing. Let's watch. Crowds throwing stones at police at the Supreme Court building, and the offices of a TV channel thrashed in the chaos. All scenes that the people of Islamabad, the nation's federal capital, woke up to on 16 March, horrified because they have not seen anything like it before. And there is a good reason for that. The city natives were not present in the crowds, most of whom were political activists from opposition parties who descended on the otherwise serene capital city from other parts of the country. And what was the issue? Judges were meeting in the Supreme Court building to decide a constitutional matter involving one of their own, a suspended Chief Justice. But opposition political parties seized the occasion, turning what was supposed to be a peaceful demonstration by lawyers outside the court building into a riot-like situation, inviting riot police to intervene. Even the acting Chief Justice, the Honorable Javed Iqbal, had to tell reporters this. There should be a proper way to demonstrate. If you are going to throw stones at police, don't expect flowers in return. For many independent Pakistani observers, this is another sign of the long-ailing Pakistani political culture, where opportunism reigns supreme. If you are in the opposition, you will not resort to logic, but will do anything you can to make the government of the day look bad, even if it involves a purely judicial and constitutional matter that has nothing to do with politics. Welcome to Pakistani politics. Okay, that was a brief thing. I wanted to show you some really clips from that event, with a brief commentary. I thought I really wanted to share that with you, and we just did. We never get into domestic affairs, but we did, just break with the tradition for this edition. Now, I'll go to the emails. I received an email from Mohammed Rizwan from Lahore with a few suggestions about things he would like to see on our show. Please talk about how President Bush is stuck these days in two quagmires. He's been severely criticized not only in South America during his visit there, but in the Middle East and Asia as well. I'd like to hear comments from U.S. Republican and Democrat legislators. Another suggestion is that, as you know, environmental change is a hot topic. So include global warming in your future list of issues to discuss. Thanks, Mohammed Rizwan from Lahore. We just don't get enough time to really talk about global warming. I mean, we have a neighborhood around Pakistan that is full of stories every week. And of course, I include also the broader Middle East region, of which we are also part. And these issues don't leave us much room to discuss anything else. I agree with you. Global warming is a hot topic. We'll try to tackle it from our perspective. But we are dealing with so many things from the Pakistani point of view in this region that, somehow we never have room for something like global warming, which is something very important, but appears to be a marginal thing when it comes to our domestic affairs. Another email from Madiha Anwar. She writes, to me, it is always a joy to watch your show. Thank you. When you invite someone who is not a seasoned politician but an impartial opinion maker. Of course, Madiha Anwar is referring to our last edition last week, to a segment where we invited former ambassador Tariq Fatmi, who is someone involved in track 2 diplomacy with the United States, dealing, of course, with American think tanks and retired foreign service people and retired military personnel. Track 2 diplomacy with the United States. So Madiha Anwar is basically saying that it's a joy to watch your show, even when you invite someone who is not a seasoned politician, but an impartial opinion maker. I believe good things deserve appreciation and approbation, so there is no point in denying them that right. Your inherent perfection in the delivery of measured words and the sense and sensibility of your guest made for an interesting conversation. I think it was worth watching. You can disagree with me if you want. Madiha Anwar. Well, Ms. Anwar, with such nice words and with such graceful praise for our show, trust me, on this show, we cannot disagree with anything that you said. Thanks for your email. Of course, keep your emails coming and tell us about the things that, in addition to what we've been covering over the past year or so, what other issues and things you'd like to see covered in our future editions. I'll be waiting for your emails. Send me your emails on worldview, single word, at ptv.com.pk. We'll see you next week, same day, same time. Until then, it's Allah Hafiz from here.